If you've seen my recent Instagram stories, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. The series had its moments, but unfortunately, it also had many weaknesses and logical flaws. Therefore, I want to make this video today. I suspect it will be quite long, and in this video, I will summarize the weaknesses and inconsistencies of the series all in one place. Consequently, I'm dividing this video into two parts. In the first, much shorter part, I will address the general weaknesses of the series and examine what might have led to these weaknesses. In the second, significantly longer part, I will delve into the various logical flaws of the series. I have also heard some counterarguments from you, which I will gladly include, try to refute, or must admit defeat and say, okay, you were right. Let's see how it will be. I will also try to find alternatives, not just complain about these logic gaps but also look at what other possibilities there might have been. In some cases, the solutions are so incredibly simple that it's a pity these logical flaws occurred at all. Let's start with the weaknesses. Besides the people who starred in the series, it also had one or two weaknesses that I would like to discuss here. The biggest weakness I see is simply that the whole thing is a prequel series with false focus. The series is set normally between episode 3 and 4, and we know some characters appearing in the series who are still alive in episode 4. This means Leia and Luke always have plot armor and cannot die. Of course, it was similar in episodes 1 to 3, where the young versions of Obi-Wan and Anakin were featured. However, in those films, it was interesting to see how the Republic becomes evil and how this pure, innocent Anakin Skywalker turns into a monster, not to mention other characters who were with them, who could have played more or less main roles and who could have died. The center of the Obi-Wan series is now also Obi-Wan's transformation from a war-scared Obi-Wan to a self-confident hermit. However, this is overshadowed by Leia's abduction, and to be honest, there is no real tension for me. We know Leia survives, we know Obi-Wan and Leia can escape from the Inquisitor's fortress, and we know the ship of Leia's father won't be blown up while Leia is inside it. It would have been more interesting, in my opinion, if the series had focused more on Obi-Wan himself and his transformation, his trauma, and how Obi-Wan finds self-assurance to properly face Luke later, or in a different direction. Instead of Leia, there should have been someone else, an unknown person, for Obi-Wan to take care of. Of course, a different reason would have had to be found, but then at least we would have had someone who could potentially have died, who might even have been murdered by Vader at the end of the show. That would have been something different. But because it is Leia, and a great focus is placed on Leia, we know nothing can happen to her. And in scenes where she is almost tortured, one quickly thinks, okay, maybe Leia will be killed here, which is stupid because we know Leia survives. So the tension is not that great, to be honest. Another weakness for me is that this series, I believe, had too low a budget, or perhaps the actors simply consumed too much money. Here and there, we really have problematic CGI, which of course does not come up to the film Star Wars standard. The series probably has too low a budget for that, but when we compare it with the other 3 live-action Star Wars series that have come out so far, I found that there was consistently better graphics there. Otherwise, the story in some places also simply needed a bit more time. Take, for example, Episode 4, where we are just 2 minutes at the beginning in the base of the Empire, and zap, zap, zap. These are the facts and we're already out of there. The backstory is not greatly developed so that one might be significantly affected later when it is attacked and people die. Also, for Tala, there is hardly any time left, which is not really tragic that she dies. We might have seen her for maybe 20 minutes or so, and that over different episodes. Everything went a bit too fast, and a bit more money for this would have probably made both the CGI and the fact that some things are just completely rushed through better. I'm not sure if it's all about money or not, but that would be my guess. Write your thoughts in the comments below about these 2 points, and let me know what you think about the logic gaps and my alternative suggestions to them. The biggest logical error that the series has, which I will go into in great detail, was the one at the end of the series. We will go through it episode by episode. I will look at episode 1, what was logically difficult there, then episode 2, and 3. So, stay tuned until the end of the video because maybe the most exciting and interesting stuff is coming. Okay, but episode 1. The biggest and only real problem I have is why does Bail Organa contact Obi-Wan at all? It is super dangerous for Leia, for him, and his family. Just to remind you, in episode 3, years before, they tried to arrest him, it failed, and Palpatine then told the galaxy afterwards that the Jedi had tried to overthrow him and seize control of the galaxy. The Jedi are branded as traitors, and that's why he now looks so mutilated. So, the Jedi are marked as traitors and in Order 66, they are attacked throughout the galaxy. Now, 10 years later, there are only very few left, but anyone who has contact with a Jedi cat, or collaborates with a Jedi, is a traitor to the Empire and can be accused of high treason and probably also executed, no matter who is standing there. So, they are on the same level as secret breakers delivering plans of the Death Star to the enemies of the Empire or even smuggling weapons to early rebel cells. Whoever does that will be quickly put on trial and probably executed soon after. I know some of you will say, Bail Organa is an integral senator, the Empire was not powerful enough back then, Bail is safe from any restrictions, any consequences. That is nonsense for several reasons, but as I said, I will go into that at the end of the video. And it's not as if there were no other possibilities than contacting Obi-Wan. He has his own security forces. I know there were power struggles on Alderaan itself among different families, but Bail should be able to trust his own people. He could have contacted other rare ears or bounty hunters, or not least the Empire. Now, it was the Empire or at least an Imperial Inquisitor who kidnapped Leia, but he could not know that at that point. So, he could also go to the Empire. Going to the Empire might be too dangerous because it attracts too much attention. But should something go wrong while trying to rescue Leia, and the Empire finds out that Leia was kidnapped, even if they know nothing of Obi-Wan, it would be strange for the Empire that an Imperial senator, when his daughter is kidnapped, does not turn to the Imperials themselves. What's behind this senator that he does not turn to the Empire when his daughter is kidnapped? Just that would attract attention and cast suspicion on the Organas. And that would basically ensure that more is investigated here, not that he says, "Oh, my daughter has been kidnapped, help me," but rather not saying it. And if it then comes out later, that's what's bad. He does not have to go straight to the Senate but simply tell the local Imperials, "Hey, guys, my daughter has been kidnapped, maybe by anti-Imperials, I don't know, help me." That would be much safer for him and his family than contacting Obi-Wan. Sure, Bail is desperate, and desperate people do stupid things, and he obviously can't know if the Empire will succeed in saving his daughter, but still, contacting Obi-Wan is so incredibly dangerous for him, for his wife, for Leia, that I can't actually imagine that this risk is worth taking if not all other means have been exhausted. Now, of course, the question is, what's the alternative? How could it be done better? In this case of the series, there are no great alternatives, because this is the start of the series. Without completely rewriting the series, there are no alternatives. Bail would have to somehow try to get the Imperials involved first. It doesn't really work, but that would of course also further delay the series. The series would need more money, it would be difficult. As I said, you can now of course say from Bail's point of view, he is desperate, he tries to go directly to the one he trusts, but it is still so incredibly dangerous, and that is already a big problem for me with the series, as the basic pillars on which the series is built are already problematic, especially since the series treats it as if it were Obi-Wan's task to simply save Leia. But that's not his task, and that should be made clearer here. His task is to save Leia without being associated with Leia and the Organas. If he can't do that, his mission has failed, and the entire Organa family is in danger, and that's hardly mentioned here, which is a pity. Now, as I said, why this is extremely problematic for several reasons, I will go into more detail at the end. For me, that's it in episode 1. There was also this moment where Obi-Wan openly showed his lightsaber, which is of course stupid of Obi-Wan, but well, it's supposed to be a thematic moment where we see Obi-Wan returning. He's constantly inviting problems. Now let's move on to episode 2, where I have several points. The first has to do with Reva. It's not necessarily a logical gap, but it's still annoying. In episode 2, we simply learned briefly that Reva belonged to the bounty hunters or pirates, however you want to call them, who kidnapped Leia because she found a connection between Obi-Wan and the Organas in the archives. Really, that's the only reason Reva made such a drastic move. Maybe she did something crazy to find out this connection between Obi-Wan and Bail Organa. But others, like Vader, who has been very obsessed with finding Obi-Wan for 10 years after episode 3 and has followed every lead, didn't investigate the Organas, where he could have also hired bounty hunters and looked more deeply into people associated with them. Obi-Wan is one of the last surviving members of the Council, of which there were only 12 when Order 66 was declared. We also see how the Inquisitors compete with each other. How good would it have been for the reputation of a single Inquisitor if he could catch a Jedi Master of the Council? No Inquisitor in the last 10 years tried to find anything in the archives about Obi-Wan and then find this connection? And then to discreetly examine Bail Organa and notice something? I find that strange. And that the other Inquisitors are also so upset that Reva has kidnapped the child of a senator, I don't understand at all. Yes, the senators had power at the beginning when the Empire started, but now it's been 10 years. We learn in the novel Rogue One that the Empire started to occupy the Hollow Net just months after Order 66, and not a little. At first, the Empire still tried to cover up many deeds from the senators, but the Empire still did things that would have greatly angered the Senate if it had come out. This is now 10 years later than some events in Rogue One, and each year the power of the Senate should decrease significantly. So it's not as if the Empire hadn't done suspicious things before or things that the Senate might not have liked very much. And besides, the Inquisitors are actually supposed to operate outside the system. They are not necessarily subject to the normal Imperial structure so that they have free choice in how they hunt down the Jedi. Reva had a few mercenaries kidnap Leia, and the mercenaries are still there and can now be killed and further evidence destroyed. So it's not as if Reva called and said, "Hey, the Inquisition has kidnapped the daughter of a senator." Everything can still be covered up, and if it's goal-oriented, my goodness. So, to get back to the point, I just find it a bit cheap to say, okay, Reva found something in the archives, so now she knows or at least suspects this connection, and otherwise, somehow, no one. It's certainly not a point that breaks the whole series, but I think it could have been written better. The question is, how could it have been written better? Either completely rewrite the series, or otherwise, take something like, for example, Mary, the one at the beginning of Tatooine, because of whom the Inquisitors come to Tatooine at all. Maybe while talking to Obi-Wan, he blabs something out of place, or hints at something from his old days, that he has a connection to Bail Organa. And Mary, before his death, is interrogated by Reva, and Mary then spills to Reva in advance that he knows this detail about Obi-Wan and Bail Organa. So she knows, kills him, leaves Tatooine, and so she knows about this connection between Bail Organa and Obi-Wan Kenobi. That would have been a possibility that could have been taken in Episode 2. But in Episode 2, something else also bothered me, and that's Aja. Remember, Aja is the one who pretends to be a Jedi. I fundamentally have two problems with him. One is that Reva lets him live in the episode, but okay, you can say after finishing the series, there's still some good in Reva, so she doesn't kill him like any other Inquisitor would have. Sliced him. But the other thing that I have a problem with is simply that Aja is someone who pretends to be a Jedi but isn't, and that's problematic from two perspectives. We learn that he does this to prove that he is one of the good guys, so to speak, and helps Force-sensitive people escape from the planet, and he seems to be more or less working with Tala, even if he makes a decent profit. Of course, today, he still pulls one over on them a bit. The problem is that real Jedi would notice, as would Obi-Wan, that he's not a Jedi. So even if he can impress children with it and maybe the parents of Force-sensitive people who are not Force-sensitive themselves, with older Force-sensitive people, he would achieve the opposite effect. Real Force-sensitive people would notice that he's just pretending to be a Jedi, so he's trying to rip me off in some way, and that would not earn him sympathy but rather the opposite, probably more likely punches. So Aja doesn't really make sense as a character who just wants to rip off other people off the street. It can work, but as a character who wants to help other people while the only people who can feel that he's not what he pretends to be are the ones he wants to help, it doesn't make much sense. And my other, much more important problem with him is that he appears publicly as a Jedi, at least semi-publicly, in a time when the Jedi are hunted by the Empire and executed on the spot or turned into Inquisitors. Even if he doesn't show himself to many people, there should still be rumors going around that there is a Jedi on Daiyu helping people. With the many bounties placed on Jedi, this rumor should quickly spread to the Empire. We also saw the people on Daiyu, they're not the richest. With the hope of a reward, this information should very quickly reach the Empire. From the comics, we know what happens to people who pretend to be Jedi but are not. They receive the same treatment as the mercenary the Grand Inquisitor sliced up. We also have the child running around, apparently telling everyone who needs help or looks like they need help that there is a Jedi helping people, just as he did with Obi-Wan. This should speed up the arrival of an Inquisitor if he's telling everyone like this. The only theory I have here is that the child who told Obi-Wan about this Jedi is Force-sensitive himself and can sense who might also be Force-sensitive and who might be a threat, and then only goes to people like Obi-Wan, from whom he knows, okay, they need help from the Empire and they won't betray us. So it stays within his small frame. That might then ensure that only those who are fleeing from the Empire or who are Jedi themselves learn about this Jedi. On the other hand, when this child addresses Obi-Wan, there are dozens of people standing around. If anyone there has good hearing, the Empire should already be on the scene. I don't know, it's somehow funny to have someone who looks like a Jedi doing various tricks and then ripping people off. But it's not really logical in this context. Now, how could you improve this? Just leave out these Force tricks. Sure, then you have one joke and one tiny plot thread less in this episode, but it makes a lot more logical sense. It would have been harder for him to just be an ordinary crook who still helps Force-sensitive people for a lot of money. And then, of course, we still had that little one sitting there in his clone armor. I didn't like that either, to be honest, but okay, you convinced me he can sit there. In my opinion, A clone sitting there should actually stand guard for a clone of this type. What then again makes no sense if there are now Imperials running around. They wouldn't necessarily let a clone of this type just sit there. On the other hand, we have things like Rex and so on, who also kept their armor. They said that they were sent into retirement. I would rather say that this is what happens to clones, or this is what becomes of clones, and that their job is not necessarily about survival, and that this they were sent into retirement is more of a euphemism. But okay, it doesn't destroy the series necessarily. Maybe this clone somehow managed to hide from the Empire, or for some reason or other, was sent into retirement. It's just a big coincidence and more of a hey, there's a clone moment. It's not why we should love this series necessarily. Of course, it's nice to have cameos and Easter eggs, but if a series is based only on that, well, it doesn't matter. As I said, I let that pass. It's not a major critique of the series from me. By the way, before we continue with the third episode, if you like the content, if you like the video, feel free to subscribe with a click on the bell. Okay, moving on to episode 3. In episode 3, there are a couple of things that are almost imperceptible and didn't seem so bad when watching the episode, but you wrote a lot about them in the comments. Namely, the ending with Reva and Leia. They are sent through these tunnels by Tala to the spaceport to meet a pilot. Tala then says goodbye, and later, Reva discovers this tunnel and suddenly she's in front of Leia at the spaceport, having killed the pilot. How did she manage to get past Leia, kill the pilot, and then wait for her? Of course, you could say that Tala maybe just went back a bit and then took a detour to come out somewhere else to help Obi-Wan. That's why Reva and Leia might not have met. That's completely fine. But still, how did Reva manage to get past Leia without her noticing? It's possible that Reva went around the outside to the spaceport because she thought, okay, this must lead to the spaceport. But the tunnel entrance Reva just discovered was hidden. She didn't see it right away, which means I would assume the tunnel exit is also hidden. Then looking for a tunnel entrance in the large spaceport takes time. She won't manage that before Leia arrives. It could also be that Reva took a detour and got to the spaceport faster, but why would various tunnels lead to the same exit point? Leia could have gotten lost, which is not shown to us. She might have taken a few wrong turns, so Reva could have overtaken and bypassed her, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't look like there are so many tunnels where Leia could get lost. It seems more like one tunnel with maybe one or two branches, and they just follow the tunnel. The only remaining possibility would be that Reva used the Force to conceal herself as a ghost, walked past Leia unnoticed, went to the end of the corridor, killed the pilot, and then waited for Leia. This would be quite possible with this ability known in canon and legends. Then the question would be, why would she do that? How could it be better done? Just show how Reva overtakes Leia and kidnaps her. Of course, as it is now in the series, it's more dramatic, but it raises a lot of unnecessary questions. Especially if Reva just grabs Leia and doesn't do anything with the pilot would still be free for other things that might be important for other logic gaps. I would have a few ideas what to do with a pilot. So, you could just let the pilot live, and the pilot is already waiting for Tala, the wounded Obi-Wan, and Leia, and then they escape together. But now to another much bigger problem in the episode. Why does Vader just let Obi-Wan go? I still don't understand it, and yes, I have read your criticism of it. Let's talk about it. After this duel in the third episode, or rather, the duel between Vader and Obi-Wan, Vader just lets Obi-Wan go. Why? They are in this large quarry, and Vader probably didn't come with a shuttle alone. He probably came with his Star Destroyer, which we saw earlier in the episode. This Star Destroyer could have an entire army inside it that could now surround this quarry in the meantime so that no one can get out. And the Star Destroyer could probably put the planet under quarantine so that no ship can escape. Completely apart from the fact that Vader and Obi-Wan are only separated by these flames, which Vader really blew out with the Force just 2 seconds ago in this episode. He could just blow out these flames and be with Obi-Wan in no time. Vader could chop Tala and Nedby into pieces and sling Obi-Wan over his shoulder and take him with him. Or he could just walk around the fire. There are many possibilities we have here. Why does Vader let Obi-Wan go, apart from the reason that Obi-Wan must still be alive in episode 4? What you could now say would be that Vader wanted to fight Obi-Wan alone. That's why the quarry here is not cordoned off. Vader is alone, he hasn't told anyone else because he wants this duel alone. Why do stormtroopers then appear behind Vader? Are these few stormtroopers the only ones on the Star Destroyer? Vader didn't bring more? I don't understand it. And if Vader wanted to fight alone, why are the stormtroopers there at all? Why risk being decapitated if Vader didn't want that? If Vader wanted support, why are there so few there? Then you could say Vader just wanted to let Obi-Wan go. He wanted Obi-Wan to leave. That was also what most of you wrote in the comments defending it. And it's even what Hayden Christensen, the actor who plays Vader, said in interviews. Vader was disgusted that Obi-Wan was so weak in this duel. He wanted Obi-Wan to suffer and let him go so that he could someday have a proper duel with him again. Okay, letting one of the most dangerous Jedi in the galaxy go just so you can fight him again someday is not the smartest thing, but it could fit with Vader and generally with the Sith. The problem is just that Vader then appears at the end of the 4th episode and is so upset at Reva that Obi-Wan was allowed to escape after he had done it himself before. Vader apparently wants Obi-Wan to be able to escape first, to become stronger, and then to fight him again someday. Why then be upset about it? Okay, if he lets Obi-Wan go so that he can stand against him later, why does he allow Obi-Wan to leave the planet? Because as I said, Vader is probably there with his Star Destroyer. He alone cannot control every ship that flies away, but Vader could simply say, until Obi-Wan is found, the planet is completely under quarantine. Vader is one of the most powerful men in the Empire. He definitely has the authority to do that. Just say, no ship may leave the planet. This will be announced throughout the planet, the ships in the spaceports will be grounded, and that should ensure that hardly any ship dares to start from the surface if it doesn't want to be suicidal and destroyed by a Star Destroyer and a lot of TIE fighters. The ships that do start, assuming Obi-Wan is inside, will be intercepted by TIE fighters, effectively keeping Obi-Wan on the planet. Either Vader wouldn't dare to flee and would stay on the planet, or he would try to get to a spaceship and then either be shot down or forced to land on the Star Destroyer, and Vader would have him there. Vader would have no problem letting Obi-Wan go because he simply knows Obi-Wan can't get off the planet. Why doesn't he do that, at least? Sure, he's angry and emotionally upset, but Vader is neither stupid nor incompetent, and finding Obi-Wan on a locked-down planet is different than letting Obi-Wan go and finding him somewhere in the galaxy. The former is much easier, the latter much more difficult. Especially considering that Vader hasn't found Obi-Wan in the last 10 years. How does Vader know he'll find him again someday and not have to search for another 10, 20, 30 years and maybe never find him again? Vader can't know that. So letting him go, yes, but maybe trying to keep Obi-Wan on the planet wouldn't be bad. That would be part of my problem solution for this episode. And to prevent Obi-Wan from just sitting on the planet for the rest of the series and eventually being killed by Vader, the series could then simply show us that the ship Tala has is an Imperial ship. Similarly, the pilot who is still alive because Reva was so clever as to grab Leia right away and not do some Force ghost trick and get around Leia, could perhaps be the rescue for Obi-Wan, Tala, and Ned B. We could learn that this pilot is maybe a high-ranking officer who has special codes to take off and might even have codes that could conceal the ship from the Empire. Or he simply has general special Imperial codes. We see a small scene where various officers on the bridge of the Star Destroyer discuss a bit back and forth whether they should let this ship go or not, and then the ship is already gone. That wouldn't be 100% what I would wish for, but it would be much more logical and also more exciting because it shows that Vader is somehow thinking along. Okay, I see that I have already recorded quite a long time, but we still have 3 more episodes to go through, and it's not getting any better. Episode 4, the episode of infiltration into the Inquisitor's fortress. I have 2 points again. First, there are simply strange security precautions there. Why can Reva just get into this fortress so easily? Do the Inquisitors just let any random Imperial officers into the fortress, and she's allowed to land with her ship, and then they ask who she actually is, then maybe she's not allowed in after all, but then she talks her way in a bit, and then she can do everything again? It's all very, very strange, especially since we know that 5 years earlier, Cal Kestis got into this fortress quite easily. Then the security precautions should now be higher than before, not lower. I am aware that Reva wants to set a trap for Obi-Wan, but does every single Imperial know that the entire fortress and the captive in the fortress are basically just bait for Obi-Wan, just an incentive for Reva to come so they can set a trap for him? If not even the other Inquisitors know about it, do the normal officers who let her in so easily know about it? This could also simply allow another Imperial official to sneak in who has nothing to do with Obi-Wan and do other things. A solution proposal here would now be to either simply say, okay, there's a special Imperial who has special security codes, so Reva gets in relatively easily, or we bring the pilot back into play, who could also be very interesting for this episode. As I said, I still have a lot planned for this pilot. He knows some extra permissions, we could see that his cover hasn't been blown yet, and that would give us a good explanation. That would be 1 to 2 extra sentences in the episode, and done. Not an, okay, I'm Imperial, I'm allowed in, but, I'm an Imperial with these and these security codes, and that's why I have special permission to enter this very special building where otherwise no one can go in. My second problem is with the end of the episode, and that's the significantly bigger problem. Suddenly, Leia appears. They shoot up the Inquisitor's fortress, they escape with Obi-Wan, Tala, and Leia to a ship in the atmosphere, and then the episode is over. Theoretically, I would expect further Imperial ships in the system that the ship cannot pass unnoticed, and other ships in this system would not be informed while Reva's plan is going on. If not even Vader or the other Inquisitors know about the plan, then the other ships in the system wouldn't know either. And Vader seems to not be far away, he gets to this Inquisitor's fortress quite quickly afterwards. That fortress on Mustafar and this moon are in the same system, they're practically on top of each other in the galaxy. Vader's Star Destroyer, I would expect to be over Mustafar. So, theoretically, a ship that appears should be noticed by someone. If there's no other ship there, okay. Then the Inquisitor's fortress and Vader's fortress on Mustafar should have sensors that can detect other ships in the vicinity. At the beginning of the episode, a bunch of TIE fighters were shown hanging in the fortress. Are these TIE fighters just decoration? As soon as an unidentified ship comes anywhere near Nua, the TIE fighters should be alerted and take off. Why doesn't that happen? And even if all that isn't the case, these TIE fighters should take off immediately after the attack and try to chase the players. Yes, Reva might want to set a trap for Obi-Wan here, but she doesn't know if Obi-Wan will come at all. If not, that could just be any other ship, a ship with turbolasers that wants to turn the Inquisitor's fortress into ash. Maybe no one knows that, probably not. In the end, the budget of the series is probably to blame. I think a lot in this episode is simply due to the constraints of Episode 4, and in Episode 4, they were also let go because the Falcon had a tracker to then lead them to the rebel base. But here in the episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, no TIE fighters were sent after them, probably because there was no more money for it. How could you make this better now? One option would be to simply explain that, since we already had the pilot with special codes flying past the Star Destroyer unnoticed in the last episode, if you go that route, you could also say, okay, we have special security codes here that make us invisible. Then you would have that in there, but then the question would be why Tala would have to sneak in at all. Otherwise, completely scrap the idea with the players with the other spaceship. As I said, I like the idea of a special pilot. This pilot flies with Tala and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan jumps into the water at some point, sneaks in, Tala goes in, the pilot stays with the ship, or at least on this ledge. Maybe the pilot even brings explosive charges and tries to walk around the hangar a bit, placing explosive charges here, attaching a device to a TIE fighter there, and as Tala, Obi-Wan, and Leia flee and there's absolutely no way out, this pilot appears with a heavy freighter from the side, maybe shoots a big rotary blaster at Reva and the other Imperials, detonates the explosion, maybe even dies in the process, giving the other three a chance to escape. And then we would also have an explanation why no other TIE fighters show up here because they've been sabotaged. For me, that would be an interesting and exciting way to end this episode. Let's move on to Episode 5. Here, I have two smaller things that aren't necessarily series breaking. One is more amusing, but I still don't understand it. In this episode, Obi-Wan eventually surrenders to Reva, saying they can work together to attack Vader. Reva doesn't respond, she doesn't say, okay, I'll work with you, or I won't work with you. She just listens and then gestures to two stormtroopers to take Obi-Wan away. However, the stormtroopers take him into the enemy's base. Why does Reva want to follow Obi-Wan there? For this to work, Obi-Wan must free himself and kill the stormtroopers, but the stormtroopers don't know that. They are not aware that they are being sent away with him to be secretly killed. Where should the stormtroopers bring Obi-Wan, then? Yes, the Empire had already invaded this base and apparently taken parts of it. It might make sense that they bring Obi-Wan into a part that's already been taken over. But by bringing Obi-Wan closer to the front line, to the chaos, and to the enemies who might free Obi-Wan, you're bringing him closer to potential rescue. And this main Imperial base outside the city, where the transports were, is where the stormtroopers were. Why bring him inside? Sure, the stormtroopers only follow orders, and if they disobey orders from the Inquisitors, they risk being decapitated soon. But here, it doesn't make sense to follow these orders. Reva just points to the stormtroopers, and that's it. The stormtroopers have just caught Obi-Wan, he's chatting with the Inquisitor. Instead of putting him in a shuttle or leaving him with the Imperial strike force that has an eye on him until Vader arrives, they bring him back towards the front line, where it's chaotic, where they're alone. That's what the stormtroopers interpret from this hand gesture? I don't understand the logic behind it. Do the stormtroopers think, okay, let's go there so he can take us out? Did they overhear that and are secretly for the Jedi, or do they think, okay, the Inquisitor made a hand gesture in that direction, let's just walk with him in that direction? I don't feel like asking. She looks so fierce. We'll figure out what our orders are. I don't get it. Wouldn't it be better if Obi-Wan said he would surrender if Reva came in, and then they pretend to fight and Reva has to leave again? Or Obi-Wan actually fights, frees himself, and runs away? Or he's taken to a shadow and secretly frees himself and sneaks back? But this simple okay, take him back to the enemy and let yourselves be killed is kind of strange. Okay, I lied, I had two things for episode 5 and another big thing for episode 6. The thing now in episode 6 is almost my second point from episode 5. In episode 6, I have several things. The first is simply how Reva can survive here on the planet Cathar. At the end of episode 5, Reva lies on the ground, stabbed by Vader, and it looks like a very bad wound. It's a wound that killed Clay, one that the Grand Inquisitor probably survived because he's a few ranks higher than Reva. But generally, it doesn't look good at the end of episode 5. It looks more like she's barely hanging on to life. Then we see the beginning of episode 6, and Reva is on Cathar without a single visible wound. No limping, no pale skin, nothing. How did she manage that? Especially since this story about Reva happens simultaneously with Obi-Wan's story. Obi-Wan then comes after her to Tatooine, and Reva is just about to arrive and has already captured Luke and is bringing him back. That means between episode 5 and 6, as we know from Obi-Wan's story, maybe a few hours pass, not days, weeks, or months. So firstly, her wounds heal in a few hours, and secondly, how does Reva manage to get to Cathar so quickly? We don't know much about the path from there, but in this order, no other ship is visible, and I don't think the Empire leaves a shuttle for Vader thinking, come on, I've killed her, but if she survives and wants to go back to her side or has something she wants to finish, she always has a shuttle. I don't really believe that. Where does she get a ship that takes her to Cathar? For the first question, you could now say she survived because of her hatred, her drive, and the help of the dark side. With such wounds, one can survive, or at least for a certain time until you get medical or cybernetic improvement or whatever that can really help. But even then, she shouldn't look so fit and be able to fight so well just a few hours after being stabbed. She can survive, yes, but then to fight as if she doesn't even have a small scratch somewhere, I don't buy that. And then, with the injuries, to get a ship so quickly and to be on Cathar within a few hours, I find it highly unlikely. There are two really easy ways to improve this. Option number 1, show how during Reva's departure from Vader, another ship is somewhere in the background. Then, when this fight with Obi-Wan and Reva takes place, simply show how injured Reva is. She only manages to fight a little bit, and here we have a former Jedi candidate who is now an Inquisitor using the dark side of the Force. That's why she can stay alive, that's why she can fight. But she's also so severely injured that two simple farmers on Tatooine can withstand a strong, or at least somewhat strong, Force user a little bit. That would even make it more likely, which I would really celebrate if that were the case. But as it is now, no. The second option would be to simply let time pass. You make the chase, the duel with Vader, in one piece. Then Obi-Wan returns, he comes to Leia, you see that with Mustafar and Vader. Obi-Wan says goodbye to Leia and finds Luke, and the credits roll for a minute or 30 seconds, and then Reva on Cathar. Oh my god, no. Luke could still be kidnapped. So, not really because he's with the Lars, but you say, for example, 6 months later. Reva had time to heal and get a ship, and you just use it as an epilogue, post-credits scene, whatever. So that was my first problem with episode 6, or rather my second with episode 5. Now I still have two things in episode 6 that are probably the most controversial and, in the last case, also the most interesting thing in this video. First, of course, the chase with the barge. I got a lot of pushback from you, but I still stand by it, at least parts of it make no sense. The first question I ask myself is why there is a Star Destroyer there. It is probably supposed to replay the scene in episode 4, but it still doesn't make much sense. In episode 4, we had no story beforehand, so anything could have been the reason why there's only one Star Destroyer, and thanks to Rogue One, we now know that it was an absolute emergency. Vader only had time to jump into his own Star Destroyer, appear, destroy the base, and then start the chase into episode 4. Here we have the story right in front of us, and Vader had quite a bit more time to gather a fleet. Why doesn't he have a fleet? I would guess due to a lack of budget or simply these attempts to create similarities to episode 4, whether it makes sense in this context or not. You could also say Vader wanted to follow Obi-Wan alone. But if you say that, the rest doesn't make sense because as soon as Obi-Wan flees from the barge, Vader has to decide to follow either the entire barge or Obi-Wan alone. Why does he have to decide? He has more than one ship at his disposal. I know there is only one Star Destroyer, but this Star Destroyer has a hangar with up to 72 TIE fighters on board, plus armed shuttles. One of these shuttles is what Vader then uses to follow Obi-Wan. So why not follow Obi-Wan and the barge with different ships? Is Obi-Wan more important than the barge? Is the barge unimportant? Absolutely not. Is Vader emotionally upset? Yes, but Vader is not an idiot, and Vader is not incompetent. The Grand Inquisitor even addresses him about it. Here, I've read some comments saying TIE fighters are short-range fighters that would then be stranded there if they are now sent out to chase the barge, for example. First, that's relatively unimportant to Vader. He would simply order the TIEs to attack the barge, destroy it, and then jump into hyperspace with his Star Destroyer. My goodness, he has 72 TIE fighter pilots, if he sends all of them at all. Maybe some of them could even be rescued. Yes, then he would have fewer TIE fighter pilots. More importantly, though, the threat would be eliminated. Especially since this would allow the possibility that Vader could continue to follow Obi-Wan and the barge could still be destroyed. It's also not as if the Empire only has one Star Destroyer. Vader could also simply tell other Imperial ships nearby, "Hey guys, here's a top priority, come here. I've sent a TIE fighter to follow a ship of the Jedi. I'll follow the other one. I'll do it alone with my Star Destroyer, but you go there, help my TIE fighters, and if the TIEs have done the job alone, just pick them up so the pilots aren't stranded." And we have a good explanation. Especially since we also know that the barge has a broken hyperdrive, and Vader also knows or can at least assume that because the barge doesn't jump into hyperspace. So whether the TIE fighters have a hyperdrive or not is irrelevant. And if Obi-Wan is not allowed to jump into hyperspace, the TIE fighters should be able to return to the Star Destroyer anyway. That would now be a possibility to send the TIE fighters towards the barge and let Vader follow Obi-Wan with the Star Destroyer. But I have an even better idea, which would also fit more if you want to say that Vader somehow wanted to follow Obi-Wan alone. From the moment the Grand Inquisitor says, "Let's follow the barge," Vader could simply say, "Yes, you're right. Here, you can temporarily take command of my Star Destroyer. This is a personal matter for me. I'll take a fighter or a shuttle. I'll continue to follow Kenobi, and you take the Star Destroyer and destroy the barge." That would be more logical because it simply shows there are several ships in play. Vader has several ships at his disposal. You don't have to focus on one, you can do both. And the other would make this fight between Obi-Wan and Vader even more personal. That whole thing would have a more personal note if Vader follows Obi-Wan alone with a fighter or a shuttle. Vader then follows Obi-Wan alone with the fighter, lands, and both have only one single ship. There is no other ship far and wide. It's a matter just between Vader and Obi-Wan. But that would have other advantages because I wonder how Obi-Wan can escape from the planet after he defeats Vader. The Star Destroyer would surely wait for Vader there and not just say, "Oh, the project's done, let's go to Scarif and enjoy the leftover beaches or something." No, the Star Destroyer would wait there for Vader. Unless the Grand Inquisitor somehow betrays Vader and does not follow his orders and asks for the barge. But that's never shown. I've also read comments that the Star Destroyer can't be everywhere around the planet, so Obi-Wan just flies away on the other side of the planet, and so the Star Destroyer can't stop Obi-Wan anyway. That only works if, first, the Star Destroyer still has 72 TIE fighters that it can use. They're relatively fast, they could catch up with Obi-Wan. And second, a ship can't just jump into hyperspace anywhere. If Obi-Wan wants to jump into hyperspace from this system, he has to adhere to certain jump points. At most systems, there is a single certain point that he must reach to get onto a hyperspace route. If the Star Destroyer waits exactly at this point or at any point where a ship has to pass through to get to this jump point, this Star Destroyer effectively blocks the entire system. That's how the blockade in Episode 1 worked. It wasn't completely around Naboo, just on one side at a certain point, because that's where people had to pass through to get to the jump point. But if Vader personally follows Obi-Wan with a fighter and the Grand Inquisitor follows the barge with the Star Destroyer, it's just a different matter. Then Obi-Wan can still sabotage Vader's ship after the duel and escape undetected because the Star Destroyer is somewhere else, while Vader then has to quickly call the Star Destroyer for help, which might still give Vader's ship a chance to escape. It would still be difficult to believe that the barge could withstand the bombardment of the Star Destroyer for long and why the TIE fighters weren't launched then. But if the characters who were still on the barge are to reappear and that happens on screen, it's certainly somehow explainable, even if I don't know how right now. All of this wouldn't make the episode much longer or more expensive. Vader just doesn't go there with a shuttle, but with a TIE fighter, and you show briefly how the Star Destroyer turns away. And in the end, you simply show how Vader calls the Star Destroyer. As I said, not much more expensive, not really longer, super easy to implement, and it makes the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader even more personal if Vader just follows Obi-Wan alone in his own fighter and doesn't come with the whole Star Destroyer with thousands of people. And it just makes the place more logical for me. It's a shame it wasn't implemented like that. And then we have the worst part, the ending on Alderaan. I have noted this as peace, joy, pancakes, and it really bothers me. Reva shows up on Alderaan and says to Obi-Wan, "No one must know that we know each other," while she has just broken into Alderaan and rescued Leia in front of everyone's eyes. Leia and Obi-Wan have a connection. The entire Empire should know by now, because if a Jedi Master, after an abduction, tries to rescue this abducted person, and if this abducted person is abducted again and this Jedi Master then comes again, there might be a connection between the family of this person and the Jedi Master. Or is there even a connection? How else would this Jedi Master know about this abduction? And yes, the Grand Inquisitor knows about Obi-Wan's connection to Leia. Dozens of people on Nua saw Obi-Wan, Leia, and Tala, and there are certainly 1 or 2 surveillance recordings that would also provide concrete evidence. So we come back to the original problem of the series: why does Bail Organa contact Obi-Wan? It's far too dangerous. And how can the Organas now live unharmed for another 9 years and support their burgeoning rebel alliance? Just letting this go and not finding an answer why Bail Organa shouldn't have contacted Obi-Wan, how they want to cover this up again, not addressing it, is to me quite insufficient. I think the whole thing can no longer be covered up after these events. Okay, I know the comments will come now saying the Empire can't do anything against senators anyway, the Senate is too powerful, and so on. A few thoughts from my side. What do you think would happen if a senator dared to criticize the Emperor publicly? What if a senator embezzled funds, thus causing enormous damage to the Empire? What if a senator, as I said, smuggled weapons to the wrong people? Senators were powerful during the time of the Republic, but even then, not all powerful, and their power was increasingly hollowed out by the Empire. This series does not take place 1 year after Episode 3, it takes place 10 years after Episode 3. If a senator here violates laws for which there would be evidence and that would also cause enormous damage to the Empire, this senator would be publicly pilloried and convicted. And that's exactly what Bail Organa did here. He collaborated with the archenemy of the Empire, and even if Bail Organa was not necessarily seen as pro-Palpatine, he was a member of the delegation of 2000 and probably a thorn in the side of the Empire from the beginning. Of course, the Empire couldn't simply attack Bail Organa, especially at the beginning, for no reason, and definitely not politically or otherwise. Bail Organa was too popular in certain circles for that, and at the beginning, the senators really did have too much power. But if the Empire has good evidence against Bail Organa, it would simply use it to remove another political opponent and replace Bail Organa in the Senate with someone more pro-Empire. Leia's adoptive mother seems quite human-centric and has imperial views. So it would even be possible within the Alderaanian royal house to find someone, probably. But okay, let's assume everything I've said so far about the Senate and so on is wrong. Even then, we still have problems, and I'm telling you, it goes even deeper. The Empire has just allowed 3 pirates to connect to Alderaan who have kidnapped the princess of the planet. What's stopping them from doing it again to lure Obi-Wan out? Yes, Palpatine forbade Vader at the end, more or less, to continue searching for Obi-Wan. But that doesn't stop the Inquisitors from searching for Obi-Wan, or bounty hunters, or other Imperials. And at least the Inquisitors know this connection. So if not others in the Empire. So the Grand Inquisitor could just go and kidnap Leia again. Sure, he was shocked when Reva kidnapped her, but Reva kidnapped Leia blindly. Now they know Leia has a connection to Obi-Wan. So he shouldn't have any scruples. Anymore. So, kidnap Leia again, lure Obi-Wan out, and the game starts all over again. So, if my first assumption that Bail Organa should actually have been executed here doesn't apply, Leia should actually be kidnapped again and again until Obi-Wan no longer wants to save her, or is caught, dead, whatever. I don't assume the prohibition against going after Obi-Wan goes on forever. Obi-Wan is an enormously important Jedi Master. Palpatine wants the Jedi to be captured, doesn't want them to train more Jedi or leave behind artifacts that could ensure that some Force-sensitive people become Jedi 10 years later. The Inquisitors are there to hunt Jedi. That's their only job. One of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, of whom it is now known that he has a connection to a senator's daughter, should be exploited. Obi-Wan should have simply ensured from the beginning that the Inquisitors do not realize that he has a connection to Leia. Then the series would have been somewhat logical in some way. But not to keep these connections secret or to cover them up afterwards by killing everyone who knows about it or whatever. If he doesn't do that, this abduction can simply happen again and again to put pressure on Obi-Wan or simply to say to Bail, okay, we're killing Leia unless you tell us where Obi-Wan is. We know you have a connection. But okay, let's assume the Empire has reasons, whatever they may be, not to prosecute the Organas and doesn't want to kill one of the most powerful surviving Jedi of his time in any way and wants to ignore this connection between Obi-Wan and the Organas, at least in this sense. What's to stop 3 pirates from simply coming to Alderaan, maybe 50 pirates, blowing up the palace on Alderaan, and secretly having the Organas killed without anything leading back to the Empire? You take someone who is friendly to the Empire, say the relatives of Leia as the new senator, and the problem of one of the most problematic senators is solved. Without it leading back to the Empire. Before, the Empire might not have dared, but now that they know, okay, he has connections to a Jedi, now they dare, as long as no one knows the Empire is behind it. Oh my god, someone was dissatisfied with the new policy of the Organas and blew them up. Or someone doesn't like the pacifist Alderaanians, so the Imperial-friendly Senator Organa is killed with his whole family. The Empire wins. Or even if that doesn't happen, there are still more things that would be more logical than the Organas having connections to a Jedi. No, we'll leave them alone because even if Palpatine doesn't want Vader to continue chasing after his feelings for Obi-Wan, what if? Let's assume all that doesn't happen, what I just said. Even then, the Empire knows Leia was with Obi-Wan and traveled on the barge. They leave Obi-Wan out of it completely. The plan seems to have escaped because Vader didn't split up, didn't send TIE fighters after the barge, or ground the Star Destroyer himself. So, the barge has escaped. Even if the Empire now assumes the Organas are completely innocent, that Leia was somehow dragged in and these people on the barge just took Leia with them out of sympathy to save her, and Leia has nothing to do with the Jedi, the Empire will want to know what she knows about the barge. The barge must have brought her back to Alderaan somehow. There must then probably be an interrogation. The Empire would want to know what Leia has seen on the barge, who was there, what plans they have, and where they might have gone next. Leia is a witness to a major crime against the Empire. She was with people who have connections to the Jedi and who have openly opposed the Empire. And even if the Empire does not suspect Leia of anything, they will want to question her. They will want to know every little detail she can remember. They will ask her about every face she saw, every conversation she heard, every planet they mentioned, every little bit that could help the Empire find this barge and the people on it. That's the bare minimum the Empire would do. They would interrogate a 10-year-old girl who has just been involved in a major crime against the Empire. They would not just let her go back to her parents and say, okay, fine, you're back with your parents. We won't bother you. No, they would interrogate her, and she would have to tell them everything. And if she doesn't remember everything exactly or contradicts herself, they might even keep her longer or have her examined by an expert to find out if she's hiding something. I know that might sound harsh, but that's how the Empire operates. And that's even assuming the Empire believes Leia has nothing to do with the Jedi and is completely innocent. Even if they believe that, they still won't just let her go. They will interrogate her and want to know everything she knows. So, the ending on Alderaan really doesn't make sense to me. It's too happy, too peaceful. It doesn't fit the situation, the context, and what we know about the Empire. Even if you don't consider everything I've said so far, even if you just consider that Leia was with the people on the barge, that alone is reason enough for the Empire to interrogate her. And even if they do believe she's innocent, they won't just let her go. They will want to know everything she knows, and they will interrogate her. That's the least they would do. So, that's my critique of the ending on Alderaan. It's too happy, too peaceful, and it doesn't fit the situation. It doesn't fit what we know about the Empire and how they operate. It's a nice ending for Leia and the Organas, but it's not realistic. It doesn't fit the context of the series and the situation. It's too easy, too convenient. And that's my biggest problem with the series. There are a lot of things that just seem too easy, too convenient, and don't fit the situation or the context. That's my biggest critique of the series. It's not that it's a bad series. It's not that it's poorly made or anything like that. It's just that there are a lot of things that don't fit, that seem too easy, too convenient, and don't fit the situation or the context. And that's my biggest critique of the series. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit long, but I had a lot to say about the series. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.